Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them, and with a stamp of feet and a flash of white tails, two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, do come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer. Only the little ants ran to and fro, and the bracken swayed gently where the two strangers had joined. The Velveteen Rabbit was all alone. "Oh dear," he thought. "Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me?" For a long time he lay very still, watching the bracken and hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and presently the sun sank lower and the little white moths fluttered out, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he knew he loved off all his whiskers, and the pink lining in his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, but he scarcely looked like a rabbit any more, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real, and when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit. When he held him close, strange people came in and out of the nursery, and a nightlight burned all night. And through it all the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, some night they may take him away, and he knew that his boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden amongst the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them into his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close to his side. And one day they let him get up and get dressed. It was a bright sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the little boy out on the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit tangled up amongst the bedclothes, thinking, the boy was getting to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes. His head was just peeping out. The little rabbit listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with must be burnt. "Hooray," thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we go to the seaside," for the boy had often talked about the seaside and wanted very much to see the coming and going of tiny crabs and the sand dunes. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this bunny?" she said. "That," said the doctor, "why, is a massive bunch of germs. Burn it at once. Get him a new one. He'll never know. He can't have it again. It's full of germs." And so the little rabbit was put in a sack. Into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish. that was carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. He was splendid bunny, all white and plush, with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to even care about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside, and that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he couldn't think of anything else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit, he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had been worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby, he could see the thicket of raspberry canes. They were growing tall and close, like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boys' gone-by mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other. The fairy huts in the flower bed, quiet evenings in the wood, and he laid in the bracken, and the little ants ran over his paws, and the wonderful day when he first knew he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real if it all ended like this? A tear, a real tear, trickled down his little shabby velvet nose, and it fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened, for where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves and the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves blossomed like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossoms opened, and out of it stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers around her neck and in her hair, and her face like the most perfect flower of all. And she came so close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on the velveteen nose that was damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved, and when they are old and worn and the children don't need them anymore, then I come and take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen, and all the forest was beautiful, and the fronds and the brackets shone like frosted silver. In the opening glade there were tree trunks with wild rabbits dancing and their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood around in a ring to stare at her. I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know about Rabbitland, for he's going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run, play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quiet for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs. He doesn't want to see or let them see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him the last time, she changed him altogether, and he might have sat there a long time too shy to move. But just then something had tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind leg to scratch it, and he found out he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen brown fur, he had soft shiny fur. His ears twitched all by themselves. His whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using his hind legs was so great that he went springing about on the turf all over the place, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did. And he grew so excited that at last he did not look for the fairy, for she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, when the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the woods behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little nose and his black eyes there was something so familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him become real. May you always be loved just as much, and this help you sleep and find peace and restoration and heal.